Hello, my name is Michaela Spittler. I teach at Spearville High School, and so today I'm going to run through the demographics of Spearville, Kansas. Okay, so looking at the community itself, you'll see that we have a pretty even 52 to 48 split between females and males. Spearville is a relatively small community, so it has under 1,000 members in the town itself. It's about 20 minutes outside of Dodge City, Kansas. So it is a relatively small town, but it is almost a 50-50 split between males and females. The town is 99% white with only 1% Hispanic, and works out to actually about 0.5% other. So you can see it's 11 people in town are Hispanic and 4 are other. We do have a lot of students that commute from Dodge City, so the community demographics are a little bit different from the school demographics. So here you can see that the school actually does have a 50-50 split between males and females, and then only 90% of the school is white. So it's down a little bit from the community itself. We do have 10% Hispanic, so many of our Hispanics actually come from Dodge City. And then it says 0% other. We do have one that is categorized as other. I found it a little strange that the websites that I was looking on for these for this information listed that as other, and there's a separate category that is African American, because I believe that one other student, or the one student that falls under other, is actually African American. So kind of strange the way they listed that. Okay, so student background. Most of the students, 98%, do speak English as their first language. There is 1% that speaks Spanish as their first language, and then another another 1% that speaks other Indo-European is what it was termed as. Never really gave a definition for what that is, so I'm not entirely sure what other languages that's referring to. We do have a few people in Dodge City, I know, that speak French as their first language, but none of them actually go to Spearville, so I'm not entirely sure what that is. As for English language learners, 95% are ELL students, and then 5% are non-ELL. And then continuing with the student background, this one actually kind of surprised me a little bit. I wasn't aware that it was this high, but we have disadvantaged students. We have 29% of our students are considered economically disadvantaged, and 71 are considered non-economically disadvantaged students. And then as for students with disabilities, 90% of our students do not have disabilities, while 10% do. And we actually have a wonderful special ed department. They are actually positioned right across the hall from me, so I talk with them a lot. We also have several paras that will go around with our students who have disabilities to help them with note-taking, understanding, activities, different things like that. So our special ed department is wonderful, and our special ed teacher is a very good advocate for those children. And then going into the academic information, this kind of surprised me a little bit too. As you'll see with most of these, our students, about 60% of our students are below level 3 in these 4 subjects, with only a small percentage hitting at level 4. So here you can see math is actually one of the highest, with percentages of students between levels 1 and 2 at 69%. English language arts happens to have the exact same. It's just a fewer number of students in the 26% in level 1. Then as we go on into science, science obviously has the highest number of, or highest percentage of students in the level 1 rating, but ends up being under math and English language arts in students in levels 1 and 2. So we have a higher percentage of our students in levels 3 and 4, and actually we have the highest number of students hitting level 4 in science. So we have students who are really, really good at science, and it's one of their best subjects in school, and then a lot of students who say it's one of their worst. So, and this one I found particularly interesting because I am a science teacher. And then with social studies obviously has the lowest number of students in level 1, but a large number of students in level 2. Also have a large number of students in level 3 with a small percentage in level 4. Alright, moving on into educational options. Here we see the graduation and success rates. So graduation rates we have from 2013 up to 2018. Don't have this previous year's graduation rates, and then the success rate, which was a little interesting to me. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the reflections, but success rate, you can see kind of fluctuates, at least for the first 3 years shown here, and then kind of stabilized a little bit. The success rates are calculated over 2 years, which is why they don't have the data for 2018. But success was defined as at least one of the following: had a student who earned an industry-recognized certification while in high school. So basically they were able to go directly into an industry out of high school. Secondly, we have a student who earned a post-secondary certificate. It's basically tech school. And then student earned a post-secondary degree. So a 2-year college, or student enrolled in post-secondary in both the first and second year following high school graduation. So most likely a 4-year college, and then was in it for at least the first 2 years. So, talking about reflections here, I did not grow up in Kansas. I actually grew up in South Carolina, and I was in an area just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, so it was actually a relatively well-off economically area. So one thing that I've kind of had to come to terms with over the past year is that not all of my students are growing up in the same way I did. Not all of them have the economic options that I did where I grew up, and so on and so forth. So again, like I said, when I was presenting the numbers, I was actually kind of surprised to know that 29% of my students are considered economically disadvantaged. Next up, we've got post-secondary success. I was kind of surprised at how it was measured. Again, where I came from, the major push was not necessarily technical schools or industry, anything like that. It was 4-year college. You got to go into a 4-year college. So our success was more measured of like acceptance rates to 4-year colleges, how many people actually finished their degrees, and then we also had a thing about scholarships to 4-year colleges. So yeah, it's a little, well, very different here than it was where I grew up. And so kind of that switch from, you know, everything was a 4-year college where I was growing up, and to saying, no, you can do tech school. Tech school is a very good option, and it's not the only thing that we have to focus on. And then ethnicity breakdown is also incredibly different. We have more Hispanics in Spearville and a lot fewer African Americans. Again, grew up in South Carolina, so there's all of that history with the African Americans and the whites and everything, but it's mostly, I would say probably 60 to 70% white and the majority of the rest of the students were African American. So a much greater African American population, very few Hispanics where I grew up. So there's a lot of that kind of cultural difference that I have to keep in mind. And I wouldn't say that it's really been a huge change for me, because I don't really consider that as, I guess, a huge change. I mean, they are very different cultures, but we did have some Hispanics growing up, and I mean, my experience is not limited to my high school experience, so it's not that I've never seen Hispanics before. It's just we had a very different ethnicity breakdown in my high school. So things to think about: I do need to keep in mind the different cultural backgrounds of my students, and then different economical disadvantages mean that students might have trouble buying supplies if I assign a project outside of class. So that's one thing that I need to think about, especially if it's something like, there's one project that I do with my physical science and chemistry students where it's basically, well, there's a concept in science called the mole, and so we make little stuffed moles, little animals basically, and then they represent different elements. And it is a project that involves sewing, and so with that, keep in mind that, you know, a good number of my students probably have never used a sewing machine before. So I actually do a couple days, when we assign that project, do a couple days where I come in with a sewing machine and help them sew all of their moles and everything. Another thing that goes along with the economical disadvantage is that some of my students may not have internet access at home, which again is something that I don't really think about all that much, because everyone, you know, got internet when I was a kid. I remember having dial-up, but even then we all had internet. It just wasn't as big of a deal at that time, because, you know, still had to use books for research and things like that. And then nowadays, I mean, you go to any college and they have internet access out on the fields, like around campus and stuff. So there's internet everywhere, and then have to think that, you know, some of my students don't have it. And a lot of this has been like actually talking with some of these students who have basically identified themselves as economically disadvantaged. And so talking with them about, you know, what they have and what they don't have at home. So it's been kind of, I mean, it's been eye-opening for me getting to know those students, and getting involved with them. So these are my references here. I used the Kansas State Department of Education for the Spearville information, the Spearville High School information, and then I used two different websites talking about the town itself. All right.